A warm welcome as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrived in Downing Street for a meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing in London to discuss how to end the war in Ukraine. As Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosted Zelenskyy at his residence, he said Western partners could do more to strengthen Kiev's long-range missile systems.
I think there's further we can do on capability, particularly long-term, long-range capability, and of course the vital work of the coalition will it when it comes to the security guarantees that are necessary.
Starmer and Zelenskyy were joined at the Foreign Office by NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, and the Netherlands' Dick Schoof. About 20 other leaders joined via video link, including French President Emmanuel Macron. They tried to show unity despite technical challenges.
We lost Keir.
After the meeting, Starmer said Ukraine's security is closely linked to that of other nations.
Ukraine's future is our future. What happens in the weeks and months ahead is pivotal for the security of the United Kingdom and all our allies across NATO and beyond. So we are determined to act now, to dial up the pressure on Putin and finally bring him to the negotiating table in good faith.
The meeting of the Coalition of the Willing comes after the US president's plans for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin were put on hold, and after he imposed sanctions on Russia's two biggest oil firms.
The sanctions that the US has placed against Russia's largest oil companies will starve them of revenue and significantly increase the pressure on Putin to come to the negotiating table. And they show once again that President Trump is absolutely committed to end this war and bring a lasting peace to Ukraine.
Starmer said the coalition has crafted a clear plan for the rest of the year, but he didn't share any concrete commitments.
For more, I'm joined by DW's Terry Schultz in Brussels and Birgit Maas in London. Birgit, I'm going to start with you. Starmer said that allies have pledged to take Russian oil and gas off global markets. How realistic is that?
Well, it's the world that has been very dependent on fuel and gas generally, and also brings home the dependency on Russian oil and gas. The EU has only now agreed to phase out Russian liquefied natural gas imports. The US has only now decided to sanction the two top Russian oil and gas producers. Now, China and India are also important players. It looks like there are signs that they are curbing their imports of Russian oil and gas, but we don't know how long will this hold and if there will potentially be secondary sanctions if they don't play ball with what the US wants. It does bring home generally the world's dependency on these fossil fuels, and that's why politicians and experts have been warning that the world must become less dependent on these fossil fuels.
Terry, stating the obvious, there's one country missing from the Coalition of the Willing, and that would be the United States, of course. How much can the allies actually achieve without the U.S.?
Well, that's right, Michael, but the Coalition of the Willing was actually set up to show the United States that the Europeans could do a lot on their own. And we should point out that now European military assistance to Ukraine is higher than that of the United States. So they have really ramped that up. But in this coalition, they were mainly talking about how they would help support Ukraine after a ceasefire, as hypothetical as that sounds right now, how they would organize further assistance in the military terms. Also, of course, they've been talking about possibly putting troops on the ground. And the last time the coalition met in Paris, some 24 of the members actually went into specifics about what they would be willing to do once there's peace on the ground in Ukraine. So again, we don't know what that peace will look like, so what these exact contributions will be able to be. But I think the coalition feels like it's actually showing the United States quite constructively that they can organize on their own. And of course, they are still hoping that the U.S. would then provide what they call a backstop and also a further deterrent to Russia not to attack any of these coalition members.
Starmer says he's committed to sending troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire has been agreed. But as you well know, Birgit, not everyone is on board. Why is that such a controversial topic?
Well, as Terry said, there is a hope that the US might provide a backstop in case there was a direct confrontation with Russian troops. But so far, this guarantee is not there. And so far, it looks like there are no security guarantees in the event of a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. That it's not a NATO mission, so no backup from the US just yet. And the risk is really just a confrontation with Russian troops. What would happen in that event? Now, we are also briefed here that it's not just about troops on the ground, but it's sort of generally showing the US, like Terry said, that Europe is committed to peace in Ukraine. It's committed also to financial help, to coordinating any sanctions, for example, coordinating diplomacy, so that Europe basically is a player when it comes to these talks. The leaders present, though, one has to say, none of them was talking about an imminent peace. So at the moment, we're in a phase where it's more putting pressure on Vladimir Putin to agree to a peace in the first place.
I'll give you the last word, Terry. It's been a long week for Zelenskyy. He got a great reception in Britain. I'm curious, do you think he is satisfied with how the week has gone in general?
President Zelenskyy also got a very warm welcome in Brussels at the European Union summit, where leaders passed their 19th round of sanctions against Russia. And as Birgit explained earlier, there are now further oil and gas sanctions, and the United States finally passed long-awaited measures against Russia's top oil and gas producers, and that's something that Europeans and the Ukrainians have long been calling for. So President Zelenskyy was asked himself how he thought things were going when he was here in Brussels at this EU summit, and he said, you know, we've got all these sanctions now. We don't have Tomahawks, the long-range missiles he's hoping for from the United States, but, you know, President Trump is not meeting with President Putin in Hungary, so basically things could be worse.
DW's Terry Schultz in Brussels and Birgit Maas in London. Many, many thanks to you both.